So this is a, I'm just going to take a sip of water. So this is a statement from Klaus Schwab, who is the founding executive chairman of World Economic Forum. He says in the new world, it's not the big fish which eats the small fish. It's the fast fish which eats the slow fish. So the whole thing, well, one of the main things about Agile is how do we get to market? How do we get our minimum viable products and our minimum marketable products to market quicker than our competitors? We've seen companies that have just, grown exponentially. And when you have a look at them, they're not massive organizations like the traditional, 50,000, 100,000, 150,000 employee organizations. A lot of them are lean, and because they're lean and because they don't have to rely on their legacy systems, like their ERP systems that they've spent millions of dollars in implementing. And now because they've spent all that huge amount of money on implementing these ERP systems, they don't want to get rid of them. And that very nature of that ERP system makes them uncompetitive because it slows down. It creates more bureaucracy. It creates more blockers in the system. And so one of the principles in Agile is ignore sunk costs. So it's very difficult to ignore sunk cost of, let's say, $100 million if you're a really big company putting in an ERP system. But if that very ERP system is what's slowing you down against your competitors, then you really got to ignore that sunk cost and start looking at other alternatives in ways of making you to speed up. Rita McGrath, I think most of you will know who Rita McGrath is. So she's sort of become the modern day, I guess, Michael Porter. Not that Michael Porter is any less relevant. But she just says we are working with outdated tools and assumptions. If you have a look at the graph on the right, it's generally called Martek's law. And what that's saying is that the speed of change over the last 15 to 20 years has grown exponentially. And we all know that. We understand how technology is just changing the way that we live. And that has really grown exponentially. But the problem is that the way that we've managed businesses over the last 40 to 50 years has not changed a lot. And that's really where the capability gap has to be closed, because we are slowly or very quickly actually starting to land up in a space where we don't understand, that most businesses don't understand the complexity of the business that they run because they haven't applied new ways of thinking. Often one of the offerings that we help our clients with is a hyper automation tool where we help them, automate as many of their sort of repetitive processes as possible. But one of the things we really struggle to get them to do is to understand how to manage man and machine. So how do you manage the employees and the machines together? And it's because that's not part of the frame of reference of the old way of managing. So the new way of managing is that you need to optimize your humans, because they can do things that your computers can't do, and your computers can do things that humans can do but shouldn't be doing because it's very repetitive in nature. So that complexity of that needs to start being managed, and we're finding very few companies are getting to grips with that. We've also got the workforce where we're starting to see more people going into what's called the gig economy. And again, how do people manage, again, from an HR, human resources perspective, how do you manage that balance of permanent full-time employees versus contractor gig employees, and then bringing that in with the automation as well? So we're finding that capability gap is growing, and it needs to be addressed very radically. So again, this is just what we've sort of covered on the last two slides to a large extent, is that the old strategy was, get really big, carve out your position and depend it as much as you can. Whereas today you need to get customer obsessed and deliver innovative value faster than your competitors. In South Africa, we have, I always call it 4.5 big banks. We used to have 4 big banks. And what I mean by big banks is like 50,000 employees each. So it's fairly big. And then we got a new one that's sort of come to the fore in the last 5 to 10 years. It's about 15,000 employees. But when they look at each other and they start comparing themselves in terms of their strategies and saying, well, I'm competing against these other 4 companies, and that's the way our strategy should be, where we're going to win, where we're going to help, etc. The fact is that they don't only have 4 other competitors. They have hundreds of other competitors. They just don't know about them. So all these small fintechs, especially in a place like Africa, where I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but we have a population in Africa of 1.3, 1.4 billion people. Now, 80% of that population is unbanked. So your traditional big banks don't cater for this 80%, which is, let's call it 1 billion people. So you've got all of these small fintechs that are running around with different ways of exchanging money, either through mobile phones or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we need to understand that customer in Africa in the financial sector is 1 billion people that don't have access to a traditional banking platform. So that's the opportunity, surely, at the end of the day.